I'm going to do a quick recap of where we're at and kind of what we've done to get to this point. If I just restart the program quickly, we'll see what exactly this is doing. So we have our main warrior character in the middle here, and then we have these enemies kind of sliding in from the side. And the idea is that we're trying to make like a 2-button brawler style game, whereby we can use the arrow keys to turn left and right. If we hold down an arrow, then she'll start to charge up her attack, and then when the attack's ready, as soon as we let go, the attack fires off. And then we're able to attack again. You know, if I press the arrow and release it too quickly before I'm charged up, then nothing will happen. So it's kind of going to be an element of like timing or rhythm or something like that, with like your attacks and their charge ups and cooldowns and stuff to try and fend off enemies kind of coming at you from either side there. So I'm just going to kind of go do a quick run through the code and kind of recap. So we had loaded some stuff in. So we'd loaded in we actually move some of this stuff around. Loaded in a background image. We defined classes for the player and for the enemies. So the player always sits in the middle, so there's not that much to the player right now. The enemies, we start them on a certain position, and they'll either start facing, if you start them over to the right, they'll start facing left and sort of gradually move left over time. That's kind of what's happening here. For the player, we have something a bit more complicated, which is this kind of state machine we created, whereby the player starts in an idle state. You can press a key to begin charging up. If you release while she's still charging, she goes back to idle. But if you wait long enough, she goes into a kind of ready state, where visually she's ultimately going to be like pulled back and ready to let off the weapon. Then if you release the key, then she'll attack and kind of cycle back around to idle. So this is the basic kind of functionality of the player class that we have here. Where are we? And our main code is kind of intercepting the left and right arrow keys and just essentially just forwarding that on to the player, who then kind of handles those in terms of gameplay and like what they actually mean, right? So if I'm idle and I press a key, then I'm going to flip around to face that direction and start charging up and so on. We've got some debugging down here, just printing how long we've been in each state. So we see that I'm idle. I'm going to press the right arrow key. It's going to flip to charging. If I let go, it's back to idle. But if I hold it down long enough, in this case it's a second and a half, then she'll eventually flip to a ready state. And then when I let go, she'll fire for an attack and cycle back to idle. And then I can go through the whole thing again like this. We just began to get some functionality in there to support loading these sprite animations, and what I now want to do is kind of begin actually tying those into the gameplay. So we had a bit of a nightmare because one of the libraries we used was not kind of properly documented, and there was a function we were using to essentially take a sprite sheet and then chop out a particular frame to display, and it was acting really funkily and strangely. So we went down a bit of a rabbit hole getting that to work. With a bit of hacking around and trial and error, we eventually made that happen. So now we have this code which can kind of handle animations for us. So when we created the player, we only defined an idle animation. I think we actually now want to define, we may as well go ahead and define all of her animations now. So this second animation is actually one of her getting attacked. So I think I'll call that hurt. And how many frames is this animation? That's a 12 frame animation there. So maybe that was the number of frames. Then we had we also had to specify for each animation where it kind of begins on the sheet. So the kind of top left coordinate of the first frame, which in this case is like 0 by 384. And then this last parameter was whether or not the animation loops. So remember, for the idle, we wanted that to loop back around. For the hurt animation, it would look weird if you kept getting hit, so we're going to set that to false so that doesn't play again. Then we have attack. I'm actually thinking of, rather than attack being one animation, we can probably split this into different sections which more closely correspond to our states, right? So having the charge up and the ready be kind of separate parts of this. So let's have a look at the animation and see what makes sense for that. So I'm just going to play this quickly, this on loop, so we can see what this looks like. So looking at this, there's this beginning section where she kind of hops back and gets ready. So I could see this being like the charge up, right? And then when you release, like maybe that's when the actual attack fires off. That kind of makes sense to me. It may also help to know, actually to not just split this into two sections, you know, the charge up and then the attack from there, but to consider the moment of impact, like right there, right? That's when she first impacts them. That's kind of a significant point as well. So I may actually think about making these first. Okay, that's the point where she's just about to spring forward. So we'll call that the charge, I think. So that's 7 frames. 7 frames, and it starts at kind of right here. 7, 6, 8. Don't want that to loop, we want it to hang around at the end of that animation. Then we actually have the attack, which is going to start kind of on the 8th frame there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Which is 2688 on the coordinates there. Could probably do this with a calculator, that may help. Yep. And how many frames is that? So we've got the first, that's the charge up, then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it's 8 frames for the actual attack. And then the little kind of reset at the end is all the rest of it. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Then 12 frames for the reset. So that's 12 frames long, and it starts at, well, I guess after these 7 and 8. It's going to start at this kind of coordinate here. Yeah, so hopefully this does what we need. So now that we've got these animations kind of defined, what we can now do is have the player actually trigger these when we go into certain states, right? So if we're idle and the direction is pressed, this is when we transition into the charge state. So at this point, let's have also change the charge animation. When you release that button and she's still charging, she goes back to idle. So again, let's have her go back to idle there. If you release it but she's ready, then she's going to actually go into the attack. The reset we can handle later. What we're probably going to need to do is maybe even add another state here for reset, or at the very least kind of detect when attack's finished and then go back into reset or something like that. Maybe not, I'm not entirely certain. Like once we get into some more of this, maybe we'll see what makes sense. But in any case, at a certain point, when the attack duration is over, she kind of needs to go back to an idle state. So let's change the animation again there. let's see what we have. Okay, so if I press the button and don't give her long enough to charge up, then she pops back to her idle loop. If I hold long enough, at some point she goes ready, and then the animation fires off, and it's kind of abruptly kind of truncated there, I guess. Okay, for now I think maybe I'll get rid of this idea of a reset animation and just make the attack animation longer. The reason I thought about splitting those up is because in terms of when we trigger like damage to all the enemies, it's kind of at this exact moment that we want to do that. If visually we want them to like flash or like go flying away or something, like that's the exact moment to trigger it. So having the animations be separate may make it easier to kind of detect that moment. But honestly, we can probably just time how long the animation's been playing for and just do it when once a certain time has passed. Is that actually playing the full animation there? I'm not totally sure. One way to look to this is to just... that's a good point, like how long is her attack? Okay, so her attack's half a second, when actually we know that if it's 20 frames long, at 50 milliseconds per frame, then it's actually a full second which her attack takes to fire off. Okay, that's nicer. There's a nicer kind of reset time now. And then as soon as I'm watching for when she visually kind of slides back and is ready again, that's also when she goes back to her idle state from attack. Like there, okay. That seems nice. You want that kind of delay, I think, for the gameplay. If you could just fire off attacks like super quick, then you could just spam them and there'd be no kind of strategy to it. It would definitely be nice to have a visual indicator when the charge, when she ticks over to ready, or even make her attack more powerful the longer you keep her in this ready stance, but that's something we can deal with later. I think one other thing we might need to know is have some event trigger when that initial moment of impact happens. So I kind of want to add a kind of counter so that we can identify this point. So I think we had her... Okay, so this is the first frame of attack, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 frames. So we know that it's 50 milliseconds per frame, so it's 8 times 50. It's 400 milliseconds, or 0.4 seconds into the attack is when the actual impact happens. I think what I'll do is have a little flag here. See whether or not the impact has triggered. Actually no, let's do this in a cleaner way. Let's amend our thing to have a kind of dedicated state in here for, impact, or even like the reset. So that an attack happens, and then we know that after, what was it, like 0.4 seconds is the moment of impact, and then another like 0.6 seconds is when the resets actually happen. So when this transition from attack to reset happens, that's when we can actually like deal the damage to the enemies and so on. The reason I just decided to do this is because I found myself starting to add a Boolean flag, which kind of did the same thing as like one of these little state transitions. So I actually kind of want to do something more like this, so we're being a bit more consistent in how we handle these things. So hey, this is the point at which the reset happens. I'm just going to print out something here so we know this is the moment of impact. Instead of going back to idle, we're going to go to the reset state. And then I'm going to handle that transition back to idle from the reset state. So if we're in the reset state, and enough time has passed, then we're going to go back to the idle and switch that animation back. Okay, let's see how this looks. I'll make this a bit bigger so we can see that impact happening. Okay, so we saw there right at the transition from the attack to the reset. It probably flew by super quickly. I don't know if the stream caught that. Try again. There's that boom printed, and that's when we would actually handle damaging stuff, I think. So how do we do this, right? How do we actually apply this damage to the enemies? So again, kind of conceptually what I want to do here, let me clear some of this stuff away. So what I would kind of want to do here is the concept of like a, I guess it's like a hitbox, if you're familiar with that from fighting games and stuff. So we have our character here, and at a certain point she's swinging her baton, and we want to kind of damage any enemy who is in a certain region. So you know, maybe it's like a box like this. We could do this more simply and just say, hey, anyone who's within a certain range of her, like they're going to get attacked. But that feels like probably a sensible way to handle that in this case, since it's purely like on a flat line. We don't have to worry about a box so much. It's just anyone within a certain range is going to get got. So let's give her a kind of an attack range here. I'm not sure what this should be, so let me put something in here, and I'm actually going to do a bit of debug drawing stuff. So if you remember from the last screen, we had this concept of like a debug mode. Which we would toggle with a certain key. So let's hit the spacebar in this case. And then when we drew the player, let's add another special thing on here for debug drawing. So if debug draw is enabled, I kind of want to draw some lines to indicate the attack range of the player. So the way I think I will do this is first we're going to change the kind of color to red. I'm going to draw a line from player's X position, which actually it's kind of should be relative to the middle of the screen. So if you're newly tuning in, we kind of define this so that comment this out for now. We kind of define things such that the kind of 0 position, the 0 coordinate, is actually the middle of the screen as opposed to like the top left, because for our gameplay that was kind of more convenient. So draw it with a positive attack range. Start from the top of the screen. Going down to the same point. And then the same kind of on the left hand side. Let's see how this looks. Okay, so what we've kind of defined here is like the kill zone for her attack. It seems actually kind of too close. Like that's 100, maybe it should actually be like 175 or something like that. So let's up that a little bit. Could also do something funky with these enemies to kind of indicate who's within range. Like, for example, if we're in debug draw and the enemy is within range, meaning what does it mean for an enemy to be in range in this case? So we've got our main character here. We've defined our attack range, which creates this kind of line. And then also on the other side, and then we have our enemy who's at a certain position. To our little short guy enemy here. What we're essentially checking is if the enemy's X position is within this. So essentially, is it less than attack range, and is it, which will mean it's, you know, to the left of this line here, and is it also greater than minus attack range, meaning it's to the right of this, which will mean that there's somewhere in this whole kill zone here. If that's the case, let's kind of tint them red. Otherwise, let's have them drawn normally. So tint them white is effectively the same thing as just drawing them unadulterated. Oh. It's gone and tinted the background, which we do not want. Cool. So, yeah, this seems to be working. As they come in and out of range, then it seems to be good. I mean, ultimately, I don't want them to like pass through the player and go to the other side. They should, ultimately, I kind of want them to like stop and just start spamming attacks or something. So you have a reason to get rid of them. what we've effectively got here is a kind of like simple like collision detection, but because everything's just on a line, it's super simple, right? We don't need to worry about the shapes of things. It's all just checking distances, more or less. But what this does mean is that when the attack happens, which is here, I'm going to create a little function to actually fire off the attack. What I kind of want to do is go through every enemy and detect like who's in range. So a handy list of enemies. This is just kind of a global variable right now, stored up in the main part of the program, which we can access. That's not doing anything. Let's ditch that. Leave it as that. Yeah, so it's really just a case of doing something pretty similar to what we used to highlight them. But it will depend whether we're facing left or right. So if we're facing to the right, we only want to target enemies who are to our right, and vice versa if they're kind of to our left. So let's say if we're facing left, otherwise the check's going to be somewhat different. So if we're facing to the left, then it means enemies in range if they're to the right of our kind of leftmost kill zone. Ooh. But they're less than 0, right? Meaning if they're like here, then they're in range, but if they're on the other side of us, then they're not in range over here. So we kind of need to limit it to just this half of the kill zone there. And what are we going to do? For now, I'm just going to do like a knockback maybe. So I'm going to just subtract something from their position. Like say 200, I don't know if that makes sense, but we'll see. Otherwise, if we're facing right, then we kind of want to check if they're within range to the right of us, and that they actually are in fact to our right and not to our left. And if we hit them when we're facing right, we want to push them to the right. So it's... yeah, right, in reality probably they're not actually going to be there, but it could be that an enemy has crept up on you from behind, and we don't want to kind of attack those, maybe. I think there could be a case there where that happens. It depends what happens when they get too close, right? Do they just do damage to you and then disappear, or is that immediately game over, or, you know, like what does it actually mean? So let me... oh, okay, what happened there? I was a bit too late. Let me move these enemies a bit further back so we have more time to handle this here. I bet I didn't even call this attack function either. No. That would help, wouldn't it? Yeah, let's wait till they get to the other side of us and check that we're not hitting them accidentally. Cool. I would say this seems to be doing what we expect it to. So I guess the next thing is we could get a bit more fancy with like how the enemies behave, but maybe we can start thinking about the enemies' behavior. I mean, in fact, does anyone have any ideas about what we want these enemies to do? Should they just stop when they get to a certain distance, or and start like swinging attacks at you? Like, how do we think this should work? what I want to do essentially is start thinking about doing one of these little charts for the enemy as well to think about their behavior. Do I dare try my tablet again? No, there's something weird. It's not configured right. Okay. So we have our enemy, and what states does the enemy have, I wonder? It feels like initially they're probably in some kind of like approach state, if that makes sense. And then they're just going to edge closer and closer. Then at a certain point, right, they're going to get into range. Yeah, if there are no suggestions, I can I can fire off with like something which I think may work. It's probably just to have them attack, right? Kind of similar to what the player does. Then kind of go into a reset. And then kind of go back into their own idle state for a while. And this is where they would maybe kind of wait around to attack again. So they'll approach you, and then when they're in a certain range of you, they'll begin to attack. And then some time will pass as their attack fires off. And then as they transition into reset, they'll like damage the player. Then when that's done, they'll go back into a kind of idle state. And then they'll basically just wait around again, like to attack. Like that feels like a sensible first pass of how these things will behave. I mean, maybe it should be game over if they get too close. I don't know if that makes sense. Let's kind of get this going, and I guess we're almost to a point where we can kind of play test this and see what makes sense. So, just like the player has states, the enemy does too. But we said that their states are a bit different. They have approach, they have kind of attack, reset, and then they go back to an idle state like that. Yeah, so now this bit here where they move towards you should actually only ever happen while they're in their approach mode, right? Then they're going to kind of come close to you. So they're going to edge towards you if they're facing left. But when they get close enough, we kind of want them to stop and start attacking, right? So what we kind of need to define here actually is how close they want to get, call it their approach range, and that should be, I don't know, like 125. Again, just sort of picking a number out of a hat here, and then we want to say if X position is, say, between like -125 and 125, it means that they're close to you. Another way to say that is if the absolute value of their X position is less than approach range. So absolute value just chops off the negative at the front if there is one. So they could be -100 or 100. So just turn it into 100, and then you can compare that against the range. This means they definitely are in range. Then we're going to change to attack state. And then I'm basically going to copy and paste some of this stuff from the player. We need to track how long they've been in their current state for, because that's how we work out that they need to kind of transition. And yes, I should be structuring the code in a way that means I don't need to copy and paste this, but the enemy can attack multiple times. They'll add on each other's spamming attack until killed or the player is defeated. Yeah, so if we do this, like maybe we just add a die state after they attack. Maybe we set it up so that maybe they can get 1 or 2 attacks in before the player gets taken out. Yeah, they could just vanish, right? That can easily fit into this model, right? We can add a vanish in here if it feels nicer to us to do that. So I guess we'll play around and see how that feels. We need much the same stuff. When they attack, I'm just going to print something out here. So when they're in range, they're going to attack, they're going to play their attack animation. They're going to reset their timer so they can start counting how long they've been attacking for. Something else to track how long they spend between attacks. And yeah, fish, as you say, maybe this doesn't happen, maybe they just vanish, but we'll play around with this. Okay, well, let's do what we want. I think this may be, let's take a look. Okay, we have an error here, probably because we didn't set up the other animations for this, so let's add attack animation in, pulling out the coordinates here. Counting how many frames it is. It's 11. Should not reset. I think those are the only animations they need. Yeah, right, that's the whole point, yeah. I mean, we're at Stray Basilisk, we're big fans of prototyping and sort of iterative development. The idea is that you get something playable as soon as possible, rather than trying to second guess what's going to be fun and what's going to work. Get something you can play and test it, right? Like, feel what really is fun or is not fun. Yeah, I think that's the best way to kind of go about this thing. So the other thing I need to factor in is how long between the start of the attack and the actual sort of moment of impact. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 frames there, it looks like. which is 6 times 50, 300 milliseconds, 0.3 seconds. And then the duration of the reset is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 5 frames or 0.25 seconds. Yeah, exactly. And that's also why I'm coding this in such a horrifically unsustainable, messy way. Right, if this made it into a final project, I could not really live with myself, but for getting something prototyped up and running in a couple of hours, you know, this is it's reasonable, I think. Okay, so they're definitely attacking, although they then seem to be getting stuck, so let's see what's happening here. You know, this is kind of getting to a point where, having said that, I do kind of want to refactor this into a switch statement. Just super common to see these with state machines of any kind. I think there's an auto fallback function here. Control T, there we go. Maybe this makes some people a little bit more happy with my code organization here. Probably missed a bracket somewhere or other. Okay, enum also lets you kind of refer to, sorry, the switch statement also lets you refer to email. Yeah, I mean, more or less that's maybe very true. Like when these states get complicated, sometimes people create separate like classes and stuff for each state, and you know that can be reasonable sometimes, but in this case it's kind of unnecessary, I think. endless arguments about where these brackets should go. I was internally debating whether to just use a switch statement to begin with, but I honestly like to keep the syntax as direct and simple as possible when kind of doing these, just so, you know, maybe somebody's not familiar with the switch statement and it's just unnecessary confusion, but in this case, yeah, it honestly does seem cleaner to me. So we have our guys dropping in, can charge up and then shoot them backwards. So they're definitely stuck in like an idle state now, it seems like. So let's see what's going on here. I guess something we should check, right, is that if we're pushed back out of range, we should go back to approach mode. So if we find ourselves out of range, let's switch back to the idle state. That would allow them to keep advancing on us. But something weird's happening there. Okay, which state are these guys ending up in? So I think probably something of the transition here. It's gone a bit wrong. So let me throw some breakpoints in here. Do a bit of debugging. I'll remember to move this so you guys can see it. Okay. Okay, something slightly weird happened there. I had a breakpoint that screwed up the timing a bit. Okay, I've figured out what's happening, which is that we're actually not updating this timer inside the enemy, so none of these timing-based transitions are actually happening. There we go. In fact, maybe overconfident. I feel like that's almost certainly it, so let's run it without the debugger. Okay, I could see them sort of chipping away at the warrior. I feel like they should be a tiny bit closer to like visually look like they're actually attacking her. So let me move this down to like 100. Yeah, right. It's looking okay. It's looking okay. Let me you know, add something like health to the player. So you have a counter here of some kind. And then whenever this attack fires off... Okay, it's also annoying me that this function is called attack, which is inside this attack state. It's more like applying the attack impact. I like super verbose names, like maybe this annoys some people, but to me this is kind of clearer what this is really doing. And all the enemy needs to do, if they attack, we know that they're in range of the player, so maybe not. Okay, is it possible that they were beginning their attack and got knocked out of range before they finished it? Maybe. So I will actually check, I think, if they're within range still. So they're within range. Just going to decrement the player's health, so take away 1 health from the player. And now I think rather than printing out the state, I'm just going to print out my current health. Cool. I can see my health getting chipped away there. There's no game over right now. I can bash them away. Okay, this is not bad. I feel like we're getting something going on here. That we can work with. Adding a bit of health onto the enemies, maybe. I don't know, like, let's call it 3 health. Take away the health. Take away the health. Now I feel like we need to get into kind of removing these enemies and then like maybe spawning them back in. So if you remember the last stream, we actually used like some pooling system for particles. So we could do something similar with the enemies. And maybe we should, but just for the sake of variation, I kind of want to do something a little bit different. Is maybe play around with using a linked list. So if you're not familiar with what a linked list is, it's a way of storing. So there's many different ways we can store things in a game, right? Like one is just an array, which is where we kind of allocate a fixed size bit of memory with a certain number of slots, and then we can just fit stuff into that, which is fine. A problem with this is if we want to remove this item, we either need a more fancy system of like recycling these slots, or you kind of just need to like create a whole new array that's like one smaller, and then like copy these things back into their kind of corresponding locations, right? Which is a whole faff which you don't want to deal with and can be kind of inefficient. There are other ways to deal with that, but yeah. Using a linked list, it's kind of different. The way a linked list works is that things are kind of defined and like daisy chained together. So that you have one item, you know, you have like you call it the head of the list, and then that just kind of points you on to the next one. So that whenever you add stuff to the list, you're just like tacking it on to the end like this. This is kind of nice because it allows you to extend the list sort of indefinitely, and it also gives you a nice property, which is that if you want to remove something from a list, all you kind of need to do is delete it and then like redirect the arrow to something else. So no matter how big the list is, you're always doing the same amount of work when you want to remove something from a list. So that's something that will work in this situation. So I think I'm going to use it here. Link stuff onto this list. And then what I kind of want to do maybe this is actually going to be too fancy and I shouldn't do it this way. Maybe I'll regret this. But a good thing about a linked list is that it's possible to remove stuff from a list as you're like looping through it, which a lot of data structures don't kind of allow you to do. But in Java there's something called an Iterator, which will kind of allow you to do this. So this is kind of functionally equivalent to that loop we had before. What an iterator is, this is kind of a Java specific thing, but most languages have a concept like this. It's kind of a little object which just keeps track of where we are in the list and allows you to say, hey, is this the last item or is there another one? Can you like move on to the next one for me? But more importantly for our purposes, it will do something like this. So if their health is less than or equal to 0, I can say remove, which will kind of pull stuff out from the list as we're sort of iterating through it. And I can use continue to like not do all this drawing stuff. So what we've effectively got is as we're looping through these enemies, if we find one with no health, we're able to remove it like as we go, which kind of gives us some nice functionality there. I don't know if that was a productive tangent to go down, but there you go. Okay, so remember these enemies had 3 health each, so one of these should be about to go down. Okay, looks like they have disappeared. Not that one. Nice. So I'm noticing one thing that's actually kind of annoying, which is that when I find myself firing off an attack, and then right now I'm already pressing left, and I kind of wanted to start turning left and charging up straight away, right? Even though I technically pressed left while she was still like resetting into position, I think it makes more sense if I'm holding left when she's finished resetting, she should start charging up at that point. So actually this bit of logic here, I feel like this is not the best way to trigger the charge up to begin. And in fact, what I kind of want to do is if we're in an idle state and if that key is down, then I'm going to immediately start charging up regardless of when I started pressing it. I feel like that will feel a bit more nice and responsive. So I wonder if there's a way to just check if a key is down without dealing with one of these event handlers. Okay, it looks like this is a way to do it. Okay, so I think what I actually want to do is if I'm idle, so if if a key is pressed. And it's the right key. Or the left key. Then I kind of want to do this. So rather than responding when the key is pressed, I'm just going to check kind of every frame whether it is pressed right now. And then transition at that point. Now I no longer need to do this. Okay, that's not kind of working as I expected. Key code equals right or key code equals left. Okay, great. So if I start pressing right again as she's still resetting, she goes straight into charging up, which is exactly what I wanted her to do. So I think kind of all we need to do now to make this pretty functional is have these enemies start spawning in by themselves. And maybe they can even get faster, right? Like over time, something like that. So I think the way I want to do this is something like set a kind of delay between spawns. So maybe to begin with, that can be a few seconds. I probably also want to keep track of the last spawn time. Or rather, seconds since the last spawn happened. And then just in my update here, add a few comments. Kind of want to add another section in here, which is for spawning. What I do is say seconds since last spawn, increase that by number of seconds elapsed. And if this is very similar to what I did with particle spawning actually in the last stream, so I'll kind of go through this pretty quickly. So here's where we want to actually spawn an enemy, right? So I'll call it kind of all I need to do is randomly pick whether they appear on the left or the right side of the screen. So I'm just say that if random between 0 and 1. If it's less than 0.5, then they'll go on the left. So over at minus width, otherwise put them on the right hand side. Honestly, that should probably do the job just fine. Ah! 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 Okay, I'm getting swamped. Okay, this is this is kind of crazy. So a few things. I think the charge up time is too much. I also feel like I probably need some visual indication that I'm charged up. So I could do this in a nicer way, I think, but I think kind of cheaty way I could do this is to take that charge up frame, which I think is this one here. Or you know what? Simple way to do it is override this draw function here. And say if we're ready, we're going to tint ourselves. What's a nice glowing, ready looking colour? This will do, won't it? 255 by 200-ish. So what I'm doing here is a little bit funky, so this is to do with classes and inheritance and stuff. Basically now what happens is when I call this player draw, it's going to call this function, which is going to set our tint, but then I also want to defer to its parent class, this sprite class, to do the actual hard work of chopping out the correct frame and doing all of that stuff. So because I've created a function called draw, the way I refer to my parent's draw function is with this super draw thing, meaning the super class draw. Blink white. Okay. Okay. Blink white sounds good. Maybe we can do that. So okay, I'm thinking the best way ultimately to make us blink white is going to be, so without using a shader to actually have us this kind of overlaid in white is actually kind of tricky. So I'm probably going to create a special, I do really like this idea by the way of blinking white, is create a special image which is kind of like an overlay. And this would allow us to do some other stuff, right? Like I could make it like glowy or something. Call this Ria Glow, perhaps. So what I kind of want to do, okay, I'm going to make this more fancy. but I'm going to say, okay, so we're just going to draw as usual. And I'm going to say if our state if you're ready, then I'm also going to draw this glow image. So I'm going to need to store this somewhere. So we now have this glow image, and then I will this is kind of annoying. Okay, I'm gonna I'm gonna steal a bit of code to actually draw this on top. This is not the cleanest way to do this, but it will do, I think. Don't need to worry about any of this animation junk. Just draw our glow image on top when we're in that state, and we'll figure out a more fancy animation for it later on. I think that's nice. This should hopefully work. Okay, seems to be doing what we expect. Let's have it maybe do some nicer visual stuff. So I think what I kind of want to do is have the glow like appear and then kind of fade out over time to give that kind of blinking effect. So we already know in the player how long they've been in the state, like the ready state, for example. So what I kind of want to do is, if this is time, then I kind of want to have the opacity of the glow just kind of like fade out over time, and then, you know, maybe this is like 1 second or something like that. So let me add something in here for how long the glow should last. I'll call it 3/4 of a second. What I then kind of want to do is to map this opacity from 255 at the top down to 0 at the end across that, in that case, 0.75 seconds. And if it's gone past that, I just want it to kind of bottom out at 0. So thankfully, processing, since it's designed for this kind of visual stuff, actually has a built-in function which basically do this for us. So all I need to say is so we're mapping. This is the map function. It's really useful for this kind of thing. And this will basically map like a value which starts with an original range. In this case, you know, from 0 to glow duration seconds. And we want to map that instead to like 255 at the beginning and 0 at the end. So the map function will do that for us. In this case, it's seconds in current state. So it will essentially like do this transformation for us, right? Because currently we have something that goes from 0 to 0.75. And we want to map it to instead go from 255 full opacity to 0. So the map will kind of handle that for us. The only other thing is we want to make sure it doesn't get below 0. Honestly, it probably wouldn't actually cause an issue, but I can just say I can do this to make sure that doesn't happen. Then I can tint this. Using that opacity. And I'll just make sure to reset the tint afterwards, because I'm probably going to screw other subsequent rendering up otherwise. Take a look. Nice. I think that's kind of done what we needed. Yeah, it looks pretty good, right? So I think one more thing I'm going to add here is it'd be nice if the enemies didn't just like jump back super abruptly, but instead like slid backwards. So I think I will do that. So instead of what I actually do when I hit an enemy is I just move their position. I kind of want to give them a speed so that they fly away over a few frames. So I'm just going to give them a little internal variable here. And then all I'm going to do is apply that speed to them and then have that speed get reduced. So handy way to do that is just kind of multiply it by some fraction so that it gets reduced over time. So each frame it's going to be like 95% of itself, which then means that if I was facing left, the speed should go to minus 200. Otherwise, let's put it to positive 200. See how that looks. Yeah, it does. You could also have something, because right now the way the mechanics work is that it's not like she gets more powerful the longer you hold the charge. If she did, then maybe that's the way you would want to do that. But since it's just like an instant trigger, she's either charged or she's not, I feel like this actually, the visuals match the gameplay, right? It doesn't give you the wrong impression. So I think these enemies are kind of doing the right thing here. They're just not getting pushed back fast enough, so I'm just going to increase this. And for good measure, I will make it a variable. So this gives us a better sense of impact. Oh, missed. Ah. Okay, I still feel kind of overwhelmed, but this is totally working now. That should be kind of easier if I could see who was in range like this, right? Spawn rate is super high, so let me drop that down a little. Yeah, so I think we're more or less about ready to wrap up. So if anyone's any last minute requests or any questions, then I'm happy to sit around for a few minutes. Otherwise, maybe I'll just continue to play this for a little while. Yeah, right. I mean, this is a rough prototype, but it's to the point where you can get the sense for whether this is actually fun to play or not, which is kind of the whole point of a prototype, I think. And yeah, like half an hour was spent like fiddling around with some little bug or issue with the library we were using, which is not uncommon. But in just a couple of hours, we got something like definitely pretty playable up and running already. And there's so many ways you could extend this, right? So I'm going to release this code to everyone. So if you want to play around, you could add different attacks with cooldowns and stuff like that. You could play around with different enemy types, different spawning patterns. You could have them kind of start appearing more quickly over time. Okay, I think I'm dead at this point. It might be nice to have it detect when you're dead and kind of reset. Yeah, I don't know why they all kind of began spawning to the right either. Seems kind of odd. I mean, I feel like this game is definitely kind of impossible at this stage. Might be the fact that they've all got 3 lives as well. That's another thing we could tune down, right? This is definitely the kind of thing you'd want to playtest and tune to be more sustainable. You'd probably want it to get faster over time or something, or start introducing new enemy types or something like that. But my main reason for picking this project is that it allows us to play around with things like sprite cheats and some like gameplay logic, getting those state machines in. I'd kind of hope that we'd be able to do something like that. Well, this feels a bit nicer. But there's definitely the bones of something kind of fun here. I'm genuinely just playing this now, so don't mind me. Yeah, this is almost to the point where I feel like I can keep them at bay, and they're occasionally hitting me. I'm sure there's a strategy to like timing it so that they end up stacking on top of each other, because then it's obviously more efficient to kind of hit them that way. Yeah, and even not on the gameplay side, in terms of just the polish and presentation, what I haven't used yet is the animations of people getting hurt. So we have like impact animations, like those could be tacked on. You could have them fade out more nicely when they're destroyed, that kind of thing. In fact, okay, I kind of can't resist doing that now. Maybe I'll go until the hour for another 15-20 minutes or so. I just play around with that kind of thing. See what polish we can get done in 15 minutes. So let's get these another state where they are dying. So having to know there's a single frame animation of them dying here. If we're dying, that one we are dead. We want to finally remove them from the list when they are dead, like that. So they're going to kind of live, well, they're going to continue visually to be around for a little while after they are dying. And then when I draw them, I still want to use the normal sprite drawing to draw them, but I kind of want to tint them based on how long they've been dying for, basically. So if so let's tint them. You kind of have them turn red as well as they fade out, so keep the red at full. Something like this to fade them to red. Have them fade out as well. We done there? I think that may be done. So at this point I'm not really explaining in great detail what's going on, but kind of just rushing to get a couple of extra little bits of polish in here. So knocking back. Yeah, there we go. That looks nice. Yeah, it works pretty well. So I could also get kind of super fancy and throw a death animation in here for our character, since we do actually have one. Yeah, right, it's kind of a nice effect. You've got this the sliding effect and also the fading out and turning red. Okay, special treat. I will I will open up some extra animations for this warrior. In fact, there's some top secret stuff here, so let me just do this in another window quickly. Okay, it's appropriately been censored here. Our pixel artist has a sense of humor. That's why there's all these weird stuff on here. But there is one extra animation which I kind of want to take out here. Yeah, I mean, so if you check our like Twitter feed or on the history of the Discord, we did actually post some stuff about this character before, so this has all been kind of released to the public in some form. But what I want to pull out is the animation where she... There we go. This is great. I really love this animation, so can't help but try and include this. This. One tear flying off into the air there. There we go. Yeah, I'm super proud of our sprite animations. Brady, the artist, is really kind of crazily talented, so it is awesome to have these. To scale this up. And then I will add another row onto this sprite sheet. Make sure it's the right size. Now I should be able to paste this in. Just making sure it is aligned properly. Okay. This animation was how many frames? Same as idle, full length there. The player one more state. Did. Then all we're going to do is say if health is less than or equal to 0. We're not yet dead. Then dead we shall become. We'll play the death animation. Okay. Let's see how this looks. Oh, bad judgment there. See, I don't know if I should highlight the enemies when they're in range, or if that should be something the player needs to kind of judge for themselves. Is that part of the challenge, or is that just kind of annoying? Ah, picked the wrong direction. This is not good. There we go. My body is then swarmed. We could probably add a little reset in here. Something like if the player is dead, and the key is space, so if somebody presses the spacebar once the player's dead, we can yeah, this is kind of hacky. I'm just reaching straight inside the player object to update their state, which is not ideal, but should be okay. Clear out all the enemies. Yeah, I think that serves as a reset. Probably forgot to reset some variables, so some weird stuff is going to happen. Also, that's the same thing I used to toggle debug. Let's make that D instead. A couple other things. Honestly, I should probably see, what I'm starting to do now is like looking into the states of these objects is not super clean, and probably the cleaner thing to do would be to add another state machine that governs like the state of the overall game itself, right? So like an intro mode, like a playing state, and then like a game over state, rather than just checking whether the player's dead to determine whether I should be spawning enemies or not. This is not a super clean way to do it, and it's ultimately not what I would generally tend to do. But you know, I'm really just trying to hack this in quickly now. And we only want to attack if the player is not dead. So then they will stop swinging, stop initiating new attacks when the player's down. So now I should wait for them both to get into range. I kind of misjudged that. there we go. It's come to gloat around my grave there, but then if I press space... Okay, the animation doesn't reset. That's something I need to happen. But okay, I think that's about a reasonable point to leave it at for now. If anyone has any questions or comments, then now's the time to throw them in. Otherwise, I kind of do a bit of housekeeping stuff. May as well leave this running in the background. So we're running a tournament tomorrow via our Discord. So if you're interested in taking part in that, then please hop over into our Discord. I will drop a link into the chat now. Anyone and everyone is welcome. We have some like prizes and stuff up for grabs during this tournament, and it's generally like a fun time, whether you're like super hardcore into the game or if you're more kind of on the casual side. It's kind of there for everyone. That gets live streamed on this channel tomorrow at a similar kind of time. Otherwise, if you just want to find out more about the game, then check out our check us out. You can search Steamhounds on Steam. So we have a coming soon page there where you can wishlist us. You can check out our Twitter for kind of regular updates. I'll drop again a couple more links in here. Yeah, otherwise, probably same time next week, I'll do a similar stream. If you have any like feedback or comments of the kind of things you'd like to see, then probably jumping into the Discord, and I'm easily available to chat to there if you have other kind of topics you'd like me to cover. I kind of like the idea of, so last week we did like a graphical little demo, like a little graphical effect, whereas this time it's more of like a little mini game, like using some of the characters from Steamhounds. I think that's a cool thing to kind of explore more. I have a couple more ideas for kind of little clones of other things which you could play around with. Yeah, so feel free to reach out and let me know what you'd be interested in, or if you just have any other general comments, thoughts, or feedback. Yeah, other than that, I think we're good, and I will catch you hopefully tomorrow for the tournament, and if not, next week, same time for another live coding stream. Okay, thanks everyone.